Call this meeting to order then. So we'll start in on item number B, the blessing and land acknowledgement. So I'll call on Councillor Manson.
As we gather, we recognize that we are on Treaty 3 lands which are steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations and Métis people today. We continue to be thankful for the partnerships with Indigenous people. We give thanks for the many blessings we enjoy in the city of Kenora. We seek wisdom in our minds, clearness in our thinking, truth in our speaking, and always love in our hearts, so that we may try to always to unite the citizens of Kenora. Let these principles guide us in our decision making.
Thank you. Moving on the agenda, public information notices, there are none. Item number D, declaration of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. If there's a member of council has any declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof pertain to any items as follows on today's agenda and from a meeting in which a member was not in attendance. Seeing none. Resolution number 1.
There's no resolution.
There
You
isn't?
just move right into, yeah, you just move into item number 1.
Okay, so we're going to move right into item number 1, educating and training members of council. First up is our current engineering and infrastructure director, Marco. No.
Morning, Mayor and Council. So I'll be giving you a little presentation today to get you up to speed on what the various aspects and scopes of work and things of that nature that are done through the Engineering and Infrastructure Services Division or Group. So today we're going to try and get Council up to speed, like I said, to provide an introduction to various departments and divisions within engineering and infrastructure. Provide some information regarding to the various works, scopes of work, tasks, and work performed by the department, and then introduce some items of interest for the various departments as they apply to those departments or divisions. So there are 5 divisions or departments. Divisions, departments are kind of interchangeable. We use those terms interchangeably. So there's fleet, solid waste, roads, sewer and water, and engineering that comprise the engineering and infrastructure services group. So moving into fleet, their primary work is related to the repair and maintenance of approximately 215 various pieces of equipment, ranging from passenger vehicles up to heavy equipment such as graders, dump trucks, loaders, etc. They also provide generator maintenance work on city generators that are located out throughout the city, primarily at our facilities as backup generators, in addition to the pumping stations and water booster stations that also have those generator units associated with that infrastructure. They also provide welding and metal repair services and fabrication for various city departments as required. They also maintain the CVOR system for compliance, and that's the Commercial Vehicle Operators Registration System that has to be, I guess, met in terms of provincial regulation for all of our heavy equipment that is registered through the province of Ontario and licensed. They carry out small engine repairs and maintenance to items such as grass cutting equipment and things of that nature, small equipment, whipper snippers, lawnmowers and things of that nature. They're also involved in the taxi meter vehicle measurement and calibration, which is done at least on an annual basis to ensure that those meters are accurate for the taxis. And finally, they do the budgeting, tendering, and purchasing, and basically the procurement of all the vehicles and equipment that the city requires or needs. So item of interest regarding to fleet. We're all looking for green alternatives, and that's one of our initiatives in our strategic plan, is the reduction of greenhouse gas. As identified in item 1.3.3 of the current strategic plan. Back in September, the fleet manager was able to attend the conference, the Canadian Association of Municipal fleet managers in Gatineau, and this was one of the hot topics, and he did bring back some information that I'll share with you in regards to this specific topic. So one of the items, or one of the alternatives, I should say, that are being considered is propane by various municipalities. It's much cleaner burning compared to gasoline and diesel. And there seems to be some fleet afoot by other municipalities to truly investigate this, as it is a proven alternative. Looking at the alternatives to the gasoline and diesel options. Electric is another alternative that was discussed at the conference, and obviously it's the most cleanest when we're looking at greenhouse gas reductions. There are some factors that need to be considered, though, going forward, jumping into an electric fleet. So some of the issues or topics and items that need to be discussed and figured out is the cost of installing many charging units both inside and outside of the operations building, as we do have vehicles that are parked inside and also outside. With the electrical demand on that building service, we may have to increase electrical services into the building to accommodate that extra electrical load for the charging units. Indoor air quality may be an issue, as when you're charging a lot of batteries in an indoor setting, they do gas off and provide various gases when charging. So we may have to look at some type of indoor air handling for those areas where vehicles are parked inside and being charged. Due to the amount of electrical systems in terms of the chargers and the batteries and so on, special fire suppression systems may be needed for the indoor parking. It has to be confirmed, I guess, at what point, if and when heavy equipment such as graders, loaders, large dump trucks and things of that nature are a compatible option for electric. And another item is obviously our winter climate. Having vehicles parked outside, we'll have to ensure that the electric option is a viable option for those vehicles that are parked outside. At -30 over a weekend, batteries frozen and things of that nature. So a few different things that have to be considered. And finally, the mechanics would have to go under a massive training exercise to get familiar with getting out of internal combustion engines, into the electrical field. And it was also noted that various tools of their trade would have to be replaced and upgraded to deal with these electric vehicles. Moving on to solid waste. So it involves the following types and scopes of work in that department. So we have garbage collection via curbside with our recycling or our collection vehicles. And it's also accepted at the transfer facility at the depot. Likewise, the recycling collection is via curbside and also available for drop-off at the recycling depot on site at the transfer facility. The site accepts the disposal of construction and demolition waste. Scrap metal is also accepted, and that goes out for sale for income and revenue. Electronic waste is also accepted via the EPRA, which is the Electronic Product Recycling Association, in an arrangement with the city. We accept, and they take the product for further recycling. Hazardous waste is also accepted on a seasonal basis from spring to fall, with a pickup by a third-party contractor for final disposal off-site. The site also accepts hog fuel, which is an ash product created from the Weyerhaeuser mill operations on the Jones Road. Sewage sludge is also accepted at the sewage from the sewage treatment plant that goes straight out to the landfill. The site also accepts commercial cardboard in bulk from various ICI producers. And household batteries and light tubes, fluorescent light tubes and the like, are also accepted on the site for disposal. Tires are also on the list of accepted materials, and those are taken off site at no cost by a contractor in Thunder Bay through funding programs through the province. Yard waste is also accepted, and it would comprise of grass clippings, leaf, yard waste, brush, and things of that nature. And it's taken to the landfill, chipped up, and composted for landfill cover material. So as part of all these scopes of work I just described, the assets and equipment that is used, obviously the collection vehicles to pick up curbside and the various equipment on site at the transfer facility and the landfill. We have the transfer station located at Malik Avenue on top of Varsky's Hill. And the Pecuniary landfill on the Jones Road is the final resting place for waste and refuse. And we have remote drop-off depots in the rural area north of the city that collect the garbage and recycling materials that are located on the Ritchie, Peterson, and Austin Lake roads. So there's a little view of what some of these remote sites look like. This one is on Peterson Road, so obviously you have your 90-gallon blue bins to collect and recycle, and the associated shed is where the waste or garbage goes. So getting into curbside collection, we have 3 curbside collection trucks, which are combination trucks, which will collect both garbage and recycling at the same time on the same route with a 2-compartment unit on the back of the truck. And we have 1 commercial recycling truck, which has the arm which will pick up the large 90-gallon drums as opposed to a manual dump into the truck, which is used for the ICI and commercial route. Coney Island is provided with a dock pickup service of recycling and garbage during summer months.
What does that look like? What do you mean dock pickup?
They basically put their recycling and garbage at the end of their dock on Mondays from spring to fall, and the solid waste staff will jump in a boat and collect that and bring it back onto mainland for
Why
final
do you
disposal.
sell in for them?
This is a level of service that the city has provided for quite some time.
Yeah.
Goodness. Okay.
So collection occurs on a Monday to Friday schedule, and those specific days will have certain geographical zones that the garbage and or recycle is collected. So in 2021, we had 455 tons of recycle and 1,052 tons of garbage that were picked up curbside with our collection trucks. The transfer facility obviously acts as a central drop-off for both garbage and recycling, whether it's our curbside collection trucks or public drop-off at the depot. The site received 387 tons of recycle and 1,003 tons of garbage in 2021. So in 2021, just to give you an idea, the total amount of waste and recycle that was processed was 36,379 tons for a typical year. Moving on to the Pecuniary landfill, it's located about 12 kilometers north of the bypass on the Jones Road. It opened up in or around November 2000, and it has a design life, or was designed for a life of 40 years, which we're anticipating about another 20 to 23 year life span remaining on that site based on current disposal rates. One thing to note is the landfill is a regional landfill, so the city of Kenora operates it and maintains it. But some history there is when the site was approved, the lands that the landfill sits on were donated by the province. And the aspect at that point in time is they had a number of regional dump sites, we'll call them, the unorganized territories that they were looking to kind of phase out and abandon. So as part of that deal, the province donating the land to the city, and I guess the Ministry of Natural Resources in the province of the day wanting to get out of the garbage business and dump business, that was the arrangement going forward. So we do accept, waste for that landfill outside of the city limits, even though the city maintains and operates the site.
Through roads boards, or people just drop their garbage, or what is it?
The landfill itself does not accept garbage directly from residents, so if they're going to use it, they have to go to the transfer facility here in town. So they'll pay their bag tag or whatnot to a normal person or a resident. Getting into items of interest in the solid waste department, one thing that has changed the landscape of recycling here in the last short while is the province has enacted legislation for this, for residential recycling to change to a user pay system by producers. So in the last few months, I guess starting in the spring, the city has had several conversations with Circular Materials. Now, Circular Materials is an agency that the producers have engaged as their front-line, agency to work on behalf of the cities and figure out recycling strategies in which the producers will end up paying 100% of the cost. So in our specific case, we had some discussions with the previous council earlier in the year in which we either could opt in or opt out of collecting recycle. So that specific arrangement was if we opted in, the city would still provide recycling services as we currently do curbside in our depots, and we would benefit from the fact that estimating about 100% of the costs would be eventually covered by the producers to run our recycling with our own staff. The other option was opting out, and Circular Materials would have to find a third-party contractor or put out contracts for the collection and final disposal of recycling. So it was decided with the previous council to continue on with the recycling collection within the city's realm. And that will start to take effect in terms of the collection on July 1st, 2023. And it's expected that contract to run about 2.5 years. So I think by the end of December 2025, that contract would end. And we would probably go through the whole process again in terms of, are we going to opt out, to let a contractor take it? Are we going to keep the recycling in-house and carry on with the future contract? So the other couple of pieces in the puzzle are the depot at the transfer facility. The way they've set the arrangements up is there's 3 separate contracts that the city could be involved in. One is obviously the collection that I've just mentioned. There also a potential of a separate contract for the depot at the transfer facility that accepts the recycle directly from the public on site. And a third component of that is what they call a receiving facility. So the arrangement there is to take the recycle and at a specific site, and for Kenora, if we were engaged in that, that would obviously be our transfer facility. The producers would make arrangement for final pickup and final disposal for the recycle, as opposed to the city having to look for markets and whatnot. So it's a little bit of a different arrangement, and so the depot and the receiving facility is something that we're currently working on. They're just starting to have some materials and discussions come out on those two separate components. But at this point in time, I think we're kind of locked into providing the curbside collection for at least the next 2.5 years after July 1st.
And I think at least the good news there is we're getting more revenue now based on this new producer pay model. So.
Right, so the current arrangement for funding is the provincial government through the WDO, which is the Waste Diversion Ontario Division, provides the city about 50% subsidy and grant on recycling. So I think a lot of the municipalities are very interested in this model where it's anticipated 100% of the costs are very close to will be covered as opposed to just 50. So the other 50% that we are involved with would come from that, from user fees, I guess, or recycling, if I'm not mistaken, is not a utility, and it can come out of that tax levy.
It does. It does
Yeah.
come out of that.
So this is really important. So solid waste at the very bottom there, Marco said the only source of revenue is user fees. So that is true for the solid waste management. The recycling is separate, and so the recycling comes out of net tax levy, but as Marco said, we imagine now, based on this new model, that we will recover all costs of recycling from the province which will come from the producers. So that's important, and I just want to say this again because I know this is something that continues to be cloudy out in the public. Not $1 of property tax goes into solid waste or management of the transfer station or landfill facilities. The only property tax goes towards recycling currently, and that will no longer be the case in 2024 once this model is fully implemented. Thanks, Your Worship. Go ahead.
Well, no, I think between the two of you, I just wanted the new council to hear that how it's actually paid for and funded, the recycle as a separation from, the solid waste, right? So and that's fine. Thank you.
So the other thing on the horizon is obviously a search for a new landfill. I've indicated, we're still 20 years out to before it's anticipated the current landfill is going to be come to its end of its life. But it's something to definitely keep on the horizon for a couple of reasons. One is, it's going to take a fair amount of time to secure and even find the site, and let alone get it approved. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at, a 10 to 15 year period to actually get a new landfill kind of in place and ready to go when the new one is expired. And again, it's not going to be cheap. From the sounds of it, things are changing at the Ministry of Environment in the province in terms of landfills, from what we can tell. The new site would have to be fully engineered, and leachate and runoff and all those kinds of things would have to be contained. They would have to be, treated, maybe trucked off site. Maybe there's a small little treatment plant, on site to treat the various leachate and whatnot, as compared to the current site, which is what they call an attenuation zone type site. So the site that was chosen on the Jones Road was very unique in terms of how the leachate and runoff is treated and not collected, but treated. So there's enough bog and enough vegetation and enough natural attenuation, what they call, for the migration of leachate off site, for those various root matters and vegetation and bogs to really retain and treat the leachate before it gets too far into various lakes and whatnot downstream. So that is a much different system and a much obviously cheaper alternative than building a new landfill, where you would have to make sure that it's all lined with rubber bladders and not 1 ounce of leachate makes it beyond the footprint, and we'd have to pump out the leachate and treat it and so on. So there are definitely some challenges going forward that in terms of finding and getting a site approved, let alone how it would actually function and where it would be sited. So something to keep on the horizon for the near future.
Could I just
Marco,
jump?
question.
Yeah, I just want to jump in, Marco. So, so Marco said right now we're looking at about 20 to 23 years for that new landfill. And so the most recent analysis that we ran, when the landfill opened in 2000, we were sort of under the volume that facility could handle year over year. And so for a while we were under, and then we're over. So while we anticipate that 20 to 23 years is the life cycle, that can fluctuate depending on the volume going in. And one of the things that I just want to highlight is the province does run some other landfill waste disposal type facilities, and they are making some moves to close some of those, which means there could be a proportionate increase in volume at our landfill, which could again continue to erode the life cycle there. So I think what Mark was trying to say is we don't know if the search for a new landfill is going to commence under this council or not, but depending on how those volumes are year over year, that 20 to 23 years may not be as far off as we think, and I just want council to be aware of that. It was a big part of why we increased bag tags last year, just to make sure we could try and get some money in a bank to be ready for when that new landfill needs to be built. Because as Marco said, you talk about land acquisition, costs now are much more, the requirements now are much more stringent than they were when this facility was built in 2000, and everything costs more now. So sorry, Marco, I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, and it is going to be a hot topic, like you said. I guess a little bit of history to that is, I think what you're alluding to is some of the not regional, but I guess outlying dumps and landfills might be closing. I think our first notice of that was Manaki is looking at closing here shortly. The reason for the little blip at the start when wastes were a little bit lower going in, when we did open up the site early in the 2000s, for a few years, actually garbage was actually trucked to the Brady landfill in Winnipeg. So that actually saved a little bit of life. The only materials that were going into the landfill when we first opened up was demolition and construction material, which didn't make sense to haul, but the residential garbage was diverted to Brady landfill. And that was a business decision of the day because it was actually cheaper with the tipping fees and the trucking to send it to Manitoba than it was to use our own landfill at that time. And then over a few years, when they started raising their tipping fees, that's when it made it economical to start using our own site here. So we did have a little bit of reprieve at the start from volumes going in. But like Kyle said, we have to be cognizant of any type of other dump or waste facility closures. But also, we all want growth and economic development. So if more people, comes more garbage. So that's another aspect we'll have to look at too, and keep an eye on where we're at with the remaining capacity going forward.
Has there been any, sorry,
Go ahead.
has there been any sort of looking yet? Have you looked at?
No, and that's what Kyle said. We're kind of keeping an eye, in the next short term, when is it proper to engage a consultant to starting to assist us with that process? Because obviously it'll be a long drawn out process. If I recall correctly, the current Jones site probably took about 8 to 10 years to get into fruition. And, with more stringent requirements and whatnot, I can only see that timeline going further. Like I said, in terms of finding and commissioning up the site. So
My kids
Kenora is not in an ideal location, I guess, for landfills with the rocks and swamps. If you're out in the prairies, you can dig a hole in the clay and you're kind of stable there. But Kenora, it was very challenging even finding the one on the Jones Road site for an attenuation zone. Based on making sure that site has capable or has enough life in it. Obviously, you want to build a site that's going to last as long as possible. 40 years was, considered pretty good at the time for this specific site. If you could find another 40-year site, that would be great. But again, with all the lakes, swamps, bedrock, it is going to be very challenging to find a site. And also a site that's within reason of trucking and within, close enough to the city.
Councilor.
We got phone calls about the Menaki site closing. They think a new dump should be built out there, and I said, probably not with the rules. So they have to transport their garbage here individually?
It would be up to them on how they do it, whether it's individual to the transfer facility, whether Menaki decides to have a dumpster or contract, a GFL or some other third party to take their waste in. But I don't think we haven't been approached yet to say, hey, are you, as a city of Kenora, interested in, potentially transporting our waste? So it's something to stay tuned about, I guess. I'm not really sure, being a smaller, municipality that they are, I don't know who calls the shots and who actually makes the decisions. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure the existing dump is controlled and potentially run by the provincial government.
Yeah.
So with that being said, are we dealing with the province, or are we dealing with Menaki, or are we dealing with both, right? So I would anticipate they would be required to bring their waste into Kenora, whether it's individuals or whether there's some other arrangement through a contractor, contracted services or whatnot. We haven't gotten into those anywhere near those kinds of discussions.
Because people are lazy. So if they have to drive individually to Kenora to get rid of their garbage, I think we're going to see more and more just thrown everywhere.
Yeah, just a couple comments, because I know there's, during the campaign, there was some discussion about other methods of eliminating the amount of garbage, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. So that's a discussion I think that council would like to have going forward. There's some opportunities there, but there's also some opportunities for, because we always talk about partnerships, and it's not just about, it can be about Menaki, it could be about Reddit, it could be the unorganized territories. but also reaching out to First Nation communities to see if there's some opportunities there for partnerships in the future, like going forward, which may help the city financially, and it might expand the scope of where a particular landfill site could occur within this jurisdiction.
Right.
So I think we need to be open to looking at all kinds of scenarios going forward, and maybe not just what we did in 2000. We might need to change the scope of how we seek out.
And public-private partnerships as well.
Well, I mean, I think we should be open to looking at all kinds of different alternatives, because it is an expensive endeavor, and I think it was brought up, and just for like some of the new council, just for their information, because we went through the bag tag, the increase, and the reason for that, besides the fact that it hadn't changed in, I don't know, 20 years, was to build up reserves in order to help offset the costs of creating a new landfill site. So I think we need to look at all those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, there's money in garbage. I mean, if you look at 5 years ago, we never had any bin services. Now there's 3. And so, I mean, there is money in garbage, so I'm sure a public-private partnership.
So to the mayor's point, earlier in my career, I had the fortune of sitting on a landfill commission, so I got pretty exposed to a lot of this. The reason the partnerships and the collaboration is so key is because the biggest challenge that we're going to run into is volume. So any waste to energy, any waste diversion, any compost, all that stuff is more and more difficult to make work financially without volume. So yeah, that's why the partnerships and collaboration, we're remote, we're fairly contained as a city. So like just to share with you, we were a landfill commission with 8 different municipal members, and we still weren't getting the volumes that we needed to take on certain projects. Yeah, just say that that's why the partnerships are going to be so important to get where we need to be to make some of these things become more feasible.
That's what happened with Northwest Recycles. That's
Yes.
why it didn't fail, because of the volume.
So great conversation to have.
Yep.
My kids will be spreading my ashes at the next landfill, that's all I know.
Interesting choice.
Oh, you young councilors will probably see it.
Anyways, thanks, Mark.
So getting into composting, the city is actively looking at options for kitchen and wet food waste. We've gone through a pilot project with Food Cycler, which is a small little appliance that people can purchase through subsidy through the city of Kenora. I think, from what I understand, the project started 2021, I believe, and the little unit is quite handy in terms of putting your food scraps in and making compost in a short period of time. The pilot project, I think, had 250 units purchased, and I think within 6 days they were all gone. So the units are around $500 a piece, and I think by the time the subsidies and whatnot came down the chain, I think the units were selling for about $150 a piece. So.
I don't have a question. I was actually one of the people who signed up for this program. We have 2 babies, and if you've ever had kids eat, this has been a lifesaver from a smell reduction in our house even. We run it at least like once or twice a day. This is a very awesome program. I was really excited that the city did this.
Right, so I think we're kicking off pilot project number 2 going forward here. I think Kyle and upper administration will be approaching council, I think, in the new year at some point to get into a phase 2 pilot project, again with the subsidized units to potentially be available to the public. So I think this is an excellent program to look at those kind of wet and kitchen wastes going forward. The city is just too small in terms of providing a wet waste pickup and doing composting on mass. So I think this is an excellent alternative to dealing with those types of kitchen waste, like you said, for smells, for...
We have like 1 bag of garbage a week.
Right, and we have a usable compost that you can use in your gardens and flower gardens and whatnot. So I think it looks like it's a very favorable program going forward, potentially, to handle those types of wastes.
Again, I don't agree that we're too small. I think that there might be interest in it from a public-private partner who could make and sell the byproduct.
Yeah.
I don't think we should give up on that.
So Marco and I had a conversation about this, because I know this is important to a number of you around the table. We have some more information. Today's not the right forum for it, but Marco and his team, they've got some information. They've worked in partnership with Thunder Bay, and Thunder Bay has been through a pretty lengthy exploratory exercise around the curbside composting. So we will have more time to talk about this. I think a good time to talk about this is when we talk about the strat plan and joint priority setting for the new council. We can bring this back to the table and we'll have a little bit more information to share. We just didn't want to chew up the whole meeting around compost today, but we do have a report that's been shared with us by Thunder Bay that just speaks to the economies of scale. And that I could just share that the reason that we decided to go with the food cycle program as a pilot originally was because we thought trying to deal with this on a home-to-home basis was more cost-effective than doing curbside. That doesn't mean that we can't revisit, but we do have some information that we can share, some research and exploration.
Yeah,
that's
all
been
I'm
done.
saying is it doesn't have to be a municipal program. We don't have to take this on. This can be a private thing, and I don't think we should lose sight of that.
And I guess the final bullet here is, as we discussed already, and I should have put a caveat on that, yes, the waste or garbage side is definitely fully funded through user fees. That's your garbage bag tags and any fees we collect via tipping fees going over the scale at the transfer facility, where recycling is net taxation and 50% subsidy through the WBO program.
Ryan, could you do me a quick favor? Could you look at what the recycling program cost in 2021 for us?
It was roughly 350,000, I
Thank you,
believe.
sir.
That's for the subsidy.
That's, so then we have a 50% subsidy that would eat into that, but 350 is what it's costing us overall
That was the expenses.
to run the whole curbside recycling program. Thanks, Ryan.
Moving on to roads, just here's some quick statistics about the road systems. So we have 272 lane kilometers of paved, 100 kilometers of surface treated, 248 lane kilometers of gravel roads. Lanes comprise 13 kilometers, sidewalks 65 kilometers, and storm sewers 41. So the reason storm sewers are underneath roads is that's where it's not its own standalone utility like sewer water, so it is put under the auspice of the roads department to look after in terms of that underground infrastructure. Now, lane kilometers, I just want to explain that. It is a different beast than just the total length of the road from one end to the other. It's an important, I guess, statistic for maintenance and whatnot. So an example would be if you have one kilometer of road and you have 2 lanes, one in each direction, that's really 2 lane kilometers. So a lane kilometer is an actual traveled portion of the road. So if there's 2 lanes, kilometer long, you need 2 kilometers of length because that grader or snowplow has to go down 1 kilometer on one side and 1 kilometer on the other. So we got to make sure we're counting apples to apples here, especially when we're looking at road maintenance and snow plowing and whatnot. It's going to take that grader or snowplow 2 kilometers of distance to plow that 1 kilometer of road. So that's why lane kilometers are used typically in these types of scenarios, and for those purposes and data collection and how the road systems are maintained. So the primary tasks for the road department are primarily maintenance in nature. So I've listed a bunch here. I'm not going to read them all out, but obviously it's everything from potholes to dust control to roadside vegetation, brushing, sidewalk repairs, storm sewer maintenance, surface treating programs, traffic signals, street lights, and so on. So the general maintenance and repair of the road and roadside environments are done typically by the roads department, and they're also involved in entrance and encroachment permit approval. So an entrance permit, when somebody wants to connect to a municipal road with a new driveway or entrance, that's where they go to get that approval and permit. And an encroachment permit is where a third party, whether private, public, utility or whatnot, wants to work within our road system and road environment or right of way. they need to come to the city to take out a permit to ensure we know who's working on the roadway, what their scopes of work are, what their timeframes are, and, certain repairs aren't done, at least we have a record of who we have to go chase to get that, rehabilitation of any harm to the road that they've created. So in addition to their normal daily routine and scopes of work, they also provide the sewer and water department with operated excavators and dump trucks for their excavations. In certain circumstances, they'll help the cemetery out with excavations and internal roadway maintenance at the cemetery. The truck drivers are sometimes sent over to solid waste when required, if there's issues of absences and whatnot in the solid waste department to ensure that the garbage trucks are moving that day. They're also involved in the potable water delivery service, which we make deliveries to customers who aren't connected to city water, have their water cisterns or tanks south of the bypass. And occasionally they'll get involved in trails and parks maintenance, through the parks department if heavy equipment's needed, graveling of parking lots and things of that nature. So they will assist the parks department in that scope of work. Minimum maintenance standards. So this is a provincial requirement under Regulation 23902. And it's to be adhered to by the city to ensure we have a defense against claims and liability for any kind of mishaps that happen on the road and or sidewalks. So just to give a little bit of insight into how this works, the roads within the municipality have to be rated from a 1 to 6. So a class 1 road would be a multi-lane freeway like down in Toronto on the 401, which is the highest level of service that needs to be taken care of. And a class 6 road is a real low volume road, probably a little dead end gravel road that has a couple of houses on it. So and then everything in between goes from a 2 to a 5 between that.
Council.
May I ask what the average grading for the city of Canora's road would be?
We'll get into the next slide. Got a little map and you can kind of get a good visual on how that comprises. So yeah, the road class system is based on volume of traffic on that road and also the speed limit. So those are the two key criteria in which roads are classified from a 1 to a 6. It's probably hard to see, but here's a visual of the various classifications within the city. The highest rating of road that we do have is a 3. We don't get into a 2 or 1, obviously we have no freeways and we don't have any road systems that have a high enough volume and or speed limit to be a 2. So as you can see in the map, if you squint, the red line that you see is Highway 17 east and west through town and Veterans Drive going up towards the bypass. So those specific roads are our class 3 roads based on volume, not so much speed limit, but definitely the volume. So those are the roads that require the most and quickest attention for any kind of defects. Moving on to the blue lines on there, which are class 4. Those are considered collector routes around the city that basically feed into the city. So that's why they're classified as a class 4 based on their volumes. So that would be like Jones Road, Airport Road, Rabbit Lake Road, Darlington Drive, out to the bypass north of Keewatin. And there's a few in town too, like Railway Street and a few collector routes, say out of Lakeside coming into town. The green lines you see are common residential roads and those associated volumes that are classified as a 5. And then we do have several roads, mostly in the northern sector of the city, that are a 6, that are small offshoot roads, dead end roads off of the major loops up in the north end of the city. So you can kind of see a majority of our streets are 5s and 6s in that table. It's hard to read, but more than half of our roads are classified as a 5 or a 6. So that is the basis that is used, I guess, to respond to various, types of inquiries and potholes and road maintenance, sign down, sidewalk hazards and things of that nature.
So just so everyone knows, we're putting minimum maintenance standards and this map, I know it's small, onto the SharePoint for you, so you'll have
Yeah,
that.
later today or at some point this week, I'll post the, I'll post the, obviously we'll have the presentation, which will have the map in it, which you should be able to zoom into. If not, I can provide a separate one. And I will post a copy of the minimum maintenance standards later on that SharePoint site. I think it's about a 14-page document.
It's there now, Marco, I just put it there.
Okay. So the standard itself basically is the guiding document to provide guidance on how often the roads need to be patrolled. Obviously, you don't know what the condition of the road is without normal maintenance and patrolling, so obviously a class 3 road needs to be patrolled more often as opposed to a class 6. So that gives direction and guidance on patrolling operations that need to be carried out. And it does provide a time frame, like I said, to which certain defects or deficiencies within the road need to be corrected. So that's usually done in a few different ways. Obviously, the patrolling through the roads department, any kind of complaints or inquiries that come in from the public are usually the two main areas of information that come to the city about defects that need to be corrected. It does also say within that standard that not only does the city need to react on known types of instances and defects on the road, but when it should have ought to have known. So there are some slippery little clauses in there for legal beagles and things of that nature going forward. So we have to be very careful on how this is kind of instituted and carried out, and how much attention is paid to various conditions throughout the road system itself.
Mark, just a quick question. So this minimum maintenance standards, OREG 23902, is that municipal act, part of the municipal act? Or is it?
It's mentioned in the municipal act.
It's under the municipal act, so.
And the regulation is the standalone standard, so it's mentioned in the act,
Gotcha.
but the regulation provides, the nuts and bolts on how to work with it.
But the regulation is under the municipal act, correct?
Yes, so it references over the OREG.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, fun fact, in my experience, this approach is a little bit unique from the province. Usually, in a lot of other provinces, the municipality gets to dictate what the minimum maintenance standard is. So it's a little bit different when you have something provincially that you have to uphold. So that is really important. That's not something we have a choice over. So I just want to highlight that because it's an important fact.
That's in Ontario, Kyle?
Yes.
Okay, so other
Yeah.
provinces, gotcha.
Councillor Manson.
So when somebody phones in with a complaint, are they told what number that their road is and what the expectations should be?
No.
We are working on a customer service approach, and that type of scripting is something that we need to talk about and make sure that people understand. So
Yeah, because if you know what your road is, then your expectation, like, yeah,
Yes.
listen, like
Thank you, please.
city center was because I am road whatever.
Right.
So it might stop some of the complaints.
Heather?
So when a customer calls into City Hall, the customer service staff who receive those calls, they will ask for their location and they will go to our standards that are set. So if your road is established as a level 2, they'll tell them that. And it will depend on when the snowfall was and when they're calling in, but they do have that scripted material now that they are trying to triage as many of those calls as they can.
Okay.
So it's the consistency that's really important, Councillor Manson, and so what we're trying to do is trying to have things flow through customer service here, get into the system, flow over to admin support in Marco's team, and then make sure that those things get closed out and responded to. So that's just part of the process that we're working on. Yeah.
Any other?
And I will have an article in the Miner in a couple weeks on, specifically on the snow stuff.
So here's a list that I've extracted out of the minimum maintenance standards, just to kind of give you an idea of what the various types of issues and concerns and deficiencies and defects that it covers everything from obviously snow accumulations and ice accumulations to cracks to potholes to, you know, like I said, when you should be patrolling. It includes the luminaires, which are the streetlight systems, signage, and so on. So one important item on the list there, I guess, is a significant weather event. So there is the opportunity within that regulation to issue a public notice saying, hey, there's a significant weather event. We're anticipating that the city will not be able to achieve its minimum maintenance standards as the resources that we have are just, you know, insufficient for a major weather event. So, you know, a good example of that is over the weekend, Buffalo got 6 feet of snow. So they're not plowing the streets and keeping them open to whatever standard they're at. So we can use that as a tool going forward, you know, as a defense to lessen the burden of the minimum maintenance standards and get back on track after a significant, you know, example, a weather event in regards to snow. So
It's really about setting expectations for the public. Hey, we've gotten quite a bit of snow, we need a little bit more time. That's really helps us.
Again, communication.
Yes, and that's something that we started using more last year, and Heather and her team did a great job in making sure that you may have seen that change in our communications. So I think we actually did that fairly well last year, and I think it's just making sure that the public knows what that expectation is when those significant events do fall.
So yeah, it will be, I guess Heather's already posted it, so you'll be able to see a lot of these different types of instances within the actual document yourself if you want to put through the minimum maintenance standards. Another item of interest is the downloading of provincial highways and bridges. So we look at the map here, and the red line indicates those roads or highways that were previously under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Transportation in the 1990s. So in the late 1990s, the provincial government decided it wanted to get out of, I guess, the road business within certain municipalities across Ontario. Unfortunately, the former three towns, Jeffrey, Mallet, Kenora, and Keewatin, were hammered with this specific outcome. So we look at the red lines on there, and there's 63 kilometers of downloaded roads that were provided. Thank you to the municipalities of the day. So they comprise of obviously the Highway 17 through town. Some of the rural routes you see that a lot of people aren't aware of, but the Coker Road System in the east, Mallet Road System, were under the control of the Ministry of Transportation. That was downloaded to Jeffrey Mallet of the day. You'll also see there's, hard to see, but there's 10 green dots on those roads, which comprise 10 bridges, which also came along with the road systems. So when we're looking at the Kenora and Keewatin area, you know, we've got a lot of major infrastructure in regards to bridges between Kenora and Keewatin. You know, the Keewatin Channel Bridge, the Gammon Bay Bridge, the east and west Winnipeg River bridges, which are the Husky Bridge we call, and the Hospital Bridge. You know, Darlington Bay Bridge out in north end of Keewatin. There's the Bay Street Overpass in Keewatin. Portage Bay was not downloaded. It was always a former town of Keewatin road and bridge system. And then there was a few bridges in the north end, Portage Bridge and the Coker Bridge were also downloaded to Jeffrey Mallet. So I guess the point here is there's been a lot of fist banging with the provincial government over the last couple of decades on, you know, how could you do this to the city? You know, we're such a small population. This is, you know, crazy to have these extra costs put onto the municipality, not only just for the capital upkeep, but even just the maintenance of these things. So from what I recall in the 1990s, there was I think two different arrangements with the provincial government. One is they didn't physically maintain some of these roads. I remember in the former town of Kenora here, the town of Kenora maintained like snow plowed, potholed, and whatnot, say the Highway 17 east and west through town, but at least we were given subsidy to carry out those operations in terms of at least a grant or a monetary influx into the roads department to maintain those roads. So that all went by the wayside, and now we're stuck with, 63 kilometers of roads and 10 bridges that, are really going to affect a lot of our budgeting and whatnot going forward. As we all know, these bridges are not getting any younger, and there's a fair amount of work to do on them on a regular basis. So when we look at repairing a bridge through a rehab or whatnot, basically that's a 10 to 15-year life extension for that bridge. But at some point, we've got to pay the piper here, and certain structures will need to be replaced.
So when did you say this was, when did you say this was done, Mark? When was it downloaded?
It was in the late 1990s, I think around 1998,
Yeah.
97, 98.
And they basically just said, here you go, figure it out with no subsidies or anything?
Basically, from what I recall, it was, don't worry, funding's coming. Something's coming. So I guess I don't want to lead this astray either. There were certain one-time monies given to the municipalities in a one lump sum shot that, in my opinion, were probably a little bit lean. And basically they said, this is some money that'll get you over for the next year or two until we figure out funding programs and all this other kind of stuff. So the way it's kind of changed is if you want to work on that highway or work on that bridge, you apply for a grant and maybe we'll give you some money as of late. So it's the last decade or so, we really see a lot of the funding programs are who has the best application. It's not who really needs it and why do you need it type thing. So it's kind of like a lottery. If you've got a great application, you might get some money. So it's
One last question,
a little
just curious,
frustrating.
who is the government power that did that?
It was the PC, so that
Mike
was Mike
Harris.
Harris.
Okay.
Okay, just a minute, please. Let's follow some protocol here, please. Councillor Manson?
So what happens if a municipality can't keep up to the standards of the roads? What happens? Nothing?
Provincially, I don't think there's anything in the minimum maintenance standards, for example, that provides any fines and whatnot to the city. I think it's more of a mechanism for the city to have a defense against third-party claims. So basically, the way I understand it is the province isn't going to come knocking on our door saying, hey, you didn't achieve your minimum maintenance standards that are required in the regulation. It's going to be more of an instance where somebody has an accident or property damage or bodily harm or things of that nature that the city will then be embroiled into that lawsuit or claim or whatnot from a third party. So I don't think there's anything in my mind that the province has to come visit the city and say, I don't think you're doing this correctly.
So is the city keeping those roads up to the maintenance or they should be?
We hope to do that because in the last year or so, we just, started bringing on more people to do more patrols and whatnot. So the emphasis is, yes, to try and get on track to make sure we have those patrols on a regular basis and we're, looking after those various defects and whatnot on a timely manner. Last year was a bit of a different beast with potholes and whatnot. We had a really extreme weather, winter. The roads never really dried out for us to do proper, pothole patching in the spring. The holes were full of water, and we just, couldn't keep up with the amount of distress to those roads. So that was a unique year compared to most that I've seen last year. So it really is dependent on weather conditions and kind of what's out of our control and how fast some of this deterioration and defects occur.
Okay, Kyle?
Yeah, I'd like to give Roberta an opportunity to chime in on the risks in just a second, but I just want to say, so something that was important about last year, okay, is that typically we use contracted services to augment our own power, okay? And we had no contractors last year until February 28th. So you couple a historic snowfall with no contractors, so what we would normally need to get the job done, we didn't have. Now that said, the question about the minimum maintenance standards, it's tough, right? You could look at it as a binary, yes or no. The truth is that more often than not, we're exceeding the minimum maintenance standards in many areas across the city. But then sometimes, there's some potholes that are getting missed, or, some roads aren't getting, or a sidewalk. So it's, most of the time, we're effectively meeting those standards and actually exceeding them. Remember, it's minimum maintenance standards. So that's the bottom line, right? And like I can tell you, this year so far, we've been exceeding. I'm on a class 6 road. The road is done, it's plowed, the sidewalks are done, so it's, I just don't want to get into this, yes we are, or no we aren't, because most of the time we're actually exceeding and doing a fairly good job. And last year, given the volume of snow and the lack of contracted services, those were really the 2 things that caught us last year. So I just want to underscore that. But I do want to give Roberta an opportunity to speak just on the risk side, what the consequences of not meeting the minimum maintenance standards would be from a risk and insurance perspective.
Sure, yeah, those standards are really important. Just to echo what Marco said, when something happens, that is the first thing that we get asked, whether it's from our insurance or OPP or, whoever is requesting the information. We have a pretty sophisticated system that we use to ensure and to track where vehicles have been on roads, the last time the road was inspected. We're starting really to mature in those systems and to understand how to leverage that information to inform our programming and the way that we action staff, as well as when there is a question, the type of information that we actually have at our hands to give out. I think, fine or no fine, it is legislation, that is a requirement. And so, it's as Marco said, sometimes the fine is less than actually what a claim could be, or a judgment. So it's very important that we continue to monitor those maintenance standards and that we staff accordingly.
Okay, Councillor Moncrief, did you have a?
Yeah, that's what's been downloaded, but how many bridges do we have?
Getting into that shortly.
Oh,
Too many.
and that's an overlay of, it looks like it goes beyond city limits.
Well, what you see there in the brown and the blue lakes
Yeah.
is the city boundary.
Okay.
So at the north end there, that would be the Coker Road coming back into the Red Road. Right at the north end at the top of the page. So we have commissioned a third party to do a rural roads needs study, which is going to be our guiding document going forward in handling and looking after and making decisions in terms of work and budgeting for rural roads going forward. We're looking forward to that study to kind of give us be a guiding document and where the city should be pursuing those types of roads.
What's the timeline?
We're looking, the study was commissioned earlier this year, and if I'm not mistaken, I think this week we were anticipating the first draft back from the consultant for a quick review, so I'm anticipating it should be available to us sometime in December or early in the new year.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to provide a little bit more context around this. So in the so Marco's predecessor in the role, Kevin Gannon, when he was here, it's in the strat plan and it was in the 2022 budget, was a transportation master plan, okay? So I want to point out that before any flooding, okay, before any of the issues that we experienced over the summer, this project or a component of this project was already in the city's sights. And I say that because it's important because yes, some things happened over the summer that drew our attention to some issues that we wanted to provide a little bit more attention to. But this wasn't something that we reacted to simply because of the floods or simply because of any noise that came from north of the bypass. Okay? So when the floods happened, of course, and Mr. Gannon departed the organization, Marco stepped up. The floods happened, we made a determination not to move forward with the full transportation master plan at that time, but it was budgeted for. And we decided to pivot to focusing on the rural roads just to try and make up some ground there. And so I just want to share that this was not simply a reaction piece, it was something that we were actually being proactive about. And Marco's going to speak a little to this. We have a street scan program that looks at the condition of our roads, but typically it's those roads that are asphalt or hot mix, and we don't have the same program on gravel roads or surface treated roads, or maybe some surface treated roads. So
Surface
please jump in there.
treated, yeah, surface treated roads are included in that street scan program.
So the point is that we have data on roads south of the bypass, which are predominantly asphalt hot mix. We didn't have that same quality of data on roads north of the bypass. So this was about getting us data and getting us the evidence that we need to make good decisions. But I just want to point out that this was actually something that the city was being proactive on before the flood. And I think that's a really important, it's important for the individuals north of the bypass and on rural roads to hear. And it's important for council to know that this wasn't something that the city, wasn't focused on. And I just want to provide that context because I think it's crucial to where we're going.
Are
Councillor
the
Mark.
vehicles, are your patrol vehicles in that GPS track?
Yeah, and they have been for a few years now. Like Roberta says, we're just fine tuning that program now to be able to not only know where the vehicle was or where it drove, but also potentially know, was the plow plowing, was the blade down, was the sander sanding, or was he just en route to another location? So we are, like Roberta says, trying to increase our capabilities of information and technology and data that we're collecting out there from a road system perspective, especially in the winter maintenance part. Like Kyle said, south of the bypass, in terms of the urban area and paved roads, on a 3-year recurring basis, we do hire a company called Street Logics and Street Scan. So they actually have a vehicle that will drive the roads and has certain instrumentation on it, radar systems and so on, that will actually drive and provide us condition pavement indexes, based on algorithms and things that radar picks up on, and photographs and so on. So that has been a real good tool for us in terms of planning our roadworks in the urban areas for the paved sections. And like Kyle says, I think this report going forward is going to provide us that information for those rural areas and gravel roads going forward for better decision making.
Yeah. Marco, just because when you speak to a lot of people in the community, and sometimes I drive on a road and I think, why has this piece of road never been looked at? And I'm not even talking about all the underground infrastructure. I understand starting underground, working your way up, and new surfaces and stuff. But at some point, there are roads in the community that require just new asphalting because they're disaster. They're almost an embarrassment. And I ran across a whole bunch when I was campaigning, and that like in there would be little strips in Q8, and they were like, and I had a all-wheel drive and that, and you're going like this. So this is how people are driving all the time, and I just. People don't understand, and we can talk about algorithms and all this because we keep getting that in almost every committee that we're involved in now. But at some point, people, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear how are we looking at and prioritizing resurfacing of roads and that. I mean, I could ring off several, and I'm sure other people around the table could too, but it's just people don't understand how we come to a conclusion to do, like Highway 17 East. There was reasons behind it, but a lot of people don't understand that, and many other roads in the community. So it's just, that's like a communication piece out to the general public to, besides budgetary issues, how does some of these roads and fixing or resurfacing of roads tie into our overall strategy, kind of moving forward? So just food for thought, because I heard it. If I didn't hear it 5 times, I heard it 500 times
Right.
about some roads.
And I guess the way we prioritize roads are under a few different criteria, I guess. One is obviously the risk involved, the type of road, and it kind of goes back to that rating system of a 3 to a 6. In terms of liability and risk defense, we really need to focus on roads that are higher risk. So that means greater speeds, more volumes, and things of that nature. So when we look at the amount of money available in any given year for a municipal paving program, typically our focus is on those roads that, you know, carry higher volumes and whatnot, that create greater risks and whatnot to the general public. So if we have to make a decision, are we gonna pave a residential dead-end road that, you know, maybe has a few more potholes than it should have on it compared to like a Highway 17 East or a railway street and so on that are either an arterial or you know, a collector route, those are the kind of decision making that we do to kind of balance those off. Now you'll see in the upcoming budget, we have made an attempt to really focus in on the road systems. So whether it's gravel roads, paved roads, arterial roads, residential roads, the way we're looking at coming up with that challenge is to still keep our municipal paving budget intact for those types of residential streets and whatnot that most people are most affected on because it's right in front of their home, versus having auxiliary budgets and road programs for other major streets. You know, like we see the Highway 17 East, you know, eventually Rabbit Lake Road will need to be done, Veterans Drive will need to be done, Airport Road, Jones Road, where, you know, if we were to do any one of these larger arterial or collector routes, nobody else gets paved that year or two because it's fully focused on these major routes. So we have put some certain things into the upcoming budget that council will have to review and kind of, you know, regurgitate and think about, I guess, going forward in terms of where we're going to put our money into roads, how it's going to be spent. But we are, in my mind, supplementing quite a bit in the capital budget, you know, starting in 2023 to focus in on roads with more requests and more asks to look after those roads. Getting the bridges. So here's the count. We have 18 vehicular bridges and 3 pedestrian bridges. So every 2 years, the engineering department secures an outside consulting firm to do a visual inspection that is required as per the Ontario Regulation 104-97. So it is a provincial requirement that bridges be at least visually inspected every 2 years. And we take those 2-year reports and start developing our bridge maintenance and our capital program from that information every 2 years. So every 2 years we're getting another wealth of information on the status and condition of the bridges and to make those decisions going forward in relation to those bridges.
So you may be saying to yourself, that sounds like a lot, right? For a community of our size, it is astronomical, and we have actually looked to see if we could find another community in a similar spot, and we can't find one. So it is a major challenge that we are dealing with, that the vast majority of other municipalities are not dealing with, particularly per capita. You're talking, you know, 700 people per bridge. It's pretty significant, you know. It's a big challenge for this city.
And even just the numbers are staggering here too, but you kind of see previously there was 10 bridges that were downloaded. So, you know, if those were still under the provincial realm, 8 bridges compared to 18 is a little more reasonable, but even so, like Kyle says, with our population base and geographical area, that's quite a few number of bridges. When we look at our cousins or sisters like in Dryden, I think have maybe one overpass they're worried about, and I think Fort Francis maybe has one overpass or underpass that they worry about. So it is quite a significant opportunity. Or not.
It's great, look how much water we have, it's awesome.
So I think Councillor Koch had a question.
Yeah, just a quick one, thanks. Which are the 3 pedestrian bridges?
So we have 3. One is the what we call the CPR pedestrian bridge, which goes over the tracks at 7th Avenue south to north. There's the Mink Bay Trail, which Barb, what narrows does that go over? It goes over a portion of Mink Bay, or is that?
Yeah, it's just the run through.
Happy Jacks.
Happy Jacks down in Keewatin, past the old ball, or the Keewatin ball fields. And the third one is, we consider this a pedestrian bridge, and that's at the Keewatin Ballpark Arena to get over the because it has floating docks on each side, but it does have a bridge so that no traffic underneath it, so that's the third.
Okay, thank you.
Coney Bridge doesn't count in those bridges?
No, we don't
That was,
Good question.
include that in our bridge inventory. Again, going back to storm sewers, it's kind of been the under or overlooked sister compared to the sanitary and water systems, because it isn't any kind of utility-based type of revenue or income for it. Is definitely currently funded under net tax levy. So we're trying to come up with different alternatives in regards to looking at a storm sewer financing study that we're looking to budget for and do in 2023 to come up with different ideas and options to potentially fund that specific utility, or not utility, but that asset group.
Could you speak, Marco, just to our sewer and our storms often meet in a Y, and that creates additional strain. Can you speak a little bit just to the strain of that system?
In certain areas of the city, especially the older ones like Lakeside and Central that are 100 years plus in the making, there are combined systems in which a catch basin or a catchment area actually has to be piped into the sanitary sewer systems and off to the sewer plant, even though it's rainwater. And that's just because of the economies of scale and the way it was kind of designed back in the day. So we have low-lying areas that, if you were to take the one catchment area with one catch basin and try and pipe that out to the lake or creek, it'd be in the millions of dollars just to take that one little localized area and deal with the stormwater. So back in the day, it wasn't uncommon to have combined sewer systems where both sewage and rainwater went through those pipes. And prior to the sewage treatment plant, it ended up in the creek, it ended up in the lake, out in the river, and it was the solution to pollution was dilution at the time. So we were lucky enough in our area here that we've made it to the point where we have sewage plants and we treat that water. So there are certain circumstances where storm sewers are connected to sanitary systems. There are certain circumstances where the sanitary is connected to the storm system, not because the sewage is going into the lake or receiving water, a body of water. It's basically due to overflows and whatnot of the system. So that's kind of the plan B when there's certain blockages or pumping stations go down or certain pumping stations that may not have a generator and whatnot. You need a backup plan to deal with that sewage. So in some cases, the sanitary sewage will flow into a storm system that will go into a lake where we have to call the Ministry of Environment and say, hey, we've had an overflow, we've had a significant event that's occurred, and all that kind of gets tracked to the LOE, and they tell us what to do and how to deal with it and so on. So there are certain little intricacies between storm systems and sanitary systems. Obviously in Kenora, it's not the easiest terrain and topography to work with. We have many hills and valleys that, trying to deal in moving sewage and or stormwater with gravity and slopes on pipes is just not possible. So.
Thanks, Mark.
And one thing I guess to keep an eye on in regards to storm sewers is obviously climate change. In the recent decade or so, we're getting more intense storms, more frequent and so on. So that's another thing we'll really have to focus on going forward in terms of, do some of these systems not only need to be replaced, do they need to be upgraded? Do we need more capacity? Are there other alternatives to deal with the stormwater going forward? Moving into sewer and water. So starting with the water treatment plant, it's located in Lakeside on 7th Street South, and it currently runs at about 25% capacity. So we're well within the realm of expansion and whatnot within the city. There's no concerns of, hey, the next short while we'll have to get a new water plant or expand its capacity. So that's one good thing. The plant itself follows a conventional filtration process, and it draws its water from the surface waters within the Lake of the Woods. In addition to the The plant staff working at the plant, they're also responsible for maintaining and looking after 5 pressure water booster stations and 3 standpipes. So as the water system gets further and further out from the water plant and those pumps, there's supplementary pumping that's needed out in that system to make sure there's pressure and volumes being pushed along to the outreaches, further outreaches of the city. So that's what the pressure booster stations are all about. The 3 standpipes, those are typically, people call them water tanks. So they're the 3 tanks that we have in town, one in Keewatin, one off of Valley Drive just across from Gun Crescent, and the 3rd one is just up the top of the hill here on 4th Street North in the north end. So the purpose of those standpipes.
Is that a water tower? Sorry.
Well, yeah,
Are you talking water towers?
Yeah.
Okay.
You call them different things. The proper name is a standpipe. So a water tower, in true definition, is a skinny base with a big bulb on the top. That's the tower.
Right.
A standpipe is full width all the way down to the ground, so it's one big tank. So, yeah, interchangeable tank or standpipe. The proper name is standpipe.
Okay, thanks.
So the purpose of the standpipes is to provide added pressure back into the water system when the water pumps are turned off or no longer required at the water plant. So as the water plant produces water and pumps water out into the system on demand, it pressurizes the system. When those pumps aren't really needed so much during off-peak hours, the system inside the water pipes is pressurized by the elevation and water in the tanks pushing back into the water system. So that's just a little general kind of how those standpipes work and why they're there. The sewage plant is located in the northwest sector of Rideout, and it's currently at about 40% capacity. So again, no real short-term or medium-term threat of overcapacity and having to build extra capacity onto the plant for any kind of future development that we may be looking at. Its process follows a contact stabilization activated sludge process, and final disinfection prior to the effluent being discharged into the Winnipeg River is via UV treatment using UV bulbs. The operators there, in addition to working at the plant, are also required to truck sewage sludge, the waste sludge, solid sludge out of the facility, and they truck that to the Pecuniary area landfill. On a daily basis, there's usually about one dump truckload a day that comes out of that facility and gets its final disposal at the landfill site. So moving into the linear assets now, the distribution system. So that's the terminology we use in the sewer and water realm of things. So the distribution system are water mains. So that's the potable water that is getting sent out to the consumer and customers via potable water pipes within the town. We currently have about 134 kilometers of water main pipe, of which 124.4 kilometers are land-based or dug into trenches on land, and 9.6 kilometers are submerged marine crossings in various locations, and I think the majority of those would be probably in Lake of the Woods here. The collection system, on the other hand, are the sewer mains, so it's the collection of sewage back to the city via the sewer pipes. It consists of 131 kilometers of pipes, 124 are land-based, and 7 kilometers are some type of a marine or submerged water crossing. So the typical day and tasks and work performed by the sewer and water department are obviously spot repairs to various sewer and water mains. So we have a water break, they will attend to that, dig a hole, fix the pipe, and fill that hole back in. Likewise with sewers, if we have collapses, blockages, and things of that nature, they'll attend to those specific hindrances within that sewer pipe. So they basically do the small maintenance repairs to the mains, whereas the capital projects are definitely contracted out. So an example would be the Second Street here, those couple of blocks that were done in the summer. That's definitely a contracted source. That would not be city staff or resources on those types of larger projects. They also attend to cleaning and maintenance of sewage pumping stations, so they'll have a crew on a 5-day, 8-hour-a-day basis attend to the 64 pumping stations to make sure they're functioning properly, they're cleaned, they're maintained and inspected, and making sure the pumps are running. They'll also change out pumps and do any other kind of minor maintenance to those stations. They also provide locating services. So when third parties or Ontario One Call is contacted by anybody for any kind of excavations or digs, the sewer and water department will go out, perform locates, paint lines in the ground and so on for underground infrastructure for those who are digging into the ground before they dig. And they'll obviously do water turn-ons and offs. A common example is we have quite a few snowbirds that leave for the winter. We'll have the water turned off in the fall and turn back on in the spring. Or if there's certain issues within the house plumbing, then you have to go attend and turn the water off on the outside of the house, and the plumber can perform the work on the inside. So that's a few examples for water turn-ons and offs.
Councillor Clark?
Just a quick question. Is there a fee for that? Are we charging the water on and off for seasonal?
Yeah, there's I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
but there is a fee schedule that's charged for any kind of private or third-party requests for sewer and water services.
I don't know if you're gonna get to this, Marco, but what happens when there's somebody's sewer line freezes up? You know, I've had friends who've had, it's a nightmare in the spring, or, their sewer line freezes and they have to excavate the roadway into their property. Is there a fee? Does the city charge a fee for that to the property owner, or how does that work?
There can be. I guess that's my third bullet here. There's a fee for service for water thaws and sewer blockage cleaning. Freezing's a bit of a different beast. It depends on where it occurs. So typically the demarcation point that we use is the property line. So anything on your side of the property line or the water shutoff that's supposed to be at or near the property line going to the house is the homeowner's responsibility. So if there's freezing, if there's a collapsed line, a water leak or something between the house and the right-of-way limit or the street, it's typically the homeowner's responsibility to call a contractor and deal with that themselves. Obviously, the city would come off and shut the water off at the curb stop for that contractor to perform repairs on the private side. And anything between that shut off or property line out to the mains in the street is typically a city responsibility. So you might see some digs out in the street where we're repairing or addressing certain circumstances, whether it's a sewer water and or water condition between the property line and out into the main. So we do provide water thawing services for a fee when certain water services get frozen. And we'll also provide sewer blockage relief, I guess, by entering the house and sticking rods down the sewer pipe to try and push any kind of blockages out into our main. But again, that's usually typically for a fee. The homeowner also has the opportunity to contact local contractors or plumbers instead of the city to provide some of those services also. But it seems like the first call is usually to the city. There is an agreement that the homeowner will have to sign off on before any services are performed and so on, to agree to certain set fees. Obviously, weekends and after hours calls are quite a bit more expensive in terms of the homeowner having to pay and whatnot, as opposed to Monday to Friday, 8 to 4:30. So there are
one last point. I was going to say, and that works pretty seamlessly. There's not any controversies or homeowner disputing the bill, or at all.
Sometimes there is, yeah, for sure. It could range on a various number of things where you didn't provide the service quick enough to, you tried and we couldn't do anything for you, to the fee is too expensive.
It's not a major issue though, not a major concern.
I don't think so. I guess we might be able to get an idea of unpaid bills and whatnot from finance, but as far as I'm concerned, or to the best of my knowledge, I don't think it's an overly growing concern of what the city has done and the bill payments coming, and the payments coming back.
And when, can I just add to
Sorry.
that? When the staff does attend a property, there are documents that the public will sign, so the customer signs, reviews, the worker will go over it with them to ensure they
It's
understand.
all very transparent.
Yes,
Okay.
so that was implemented several years ago, so they do know, the customer does know in advance what they'll be paying for.
And it worked, just from at the school board, we used it all the time, it works well.
Okay.
And you know up front, and, yeah, and sometimes it takes longer than you anticipate, but that's the chance you take, so, Councilor Manson.
How many residents in city proper don't have sewer and water? And can you explain how that happens? Because isn't there a percentage they pay for, and how does that work?
Well, sewer and water is a user-based program, so if you do not have sewer and water, you do not pay.
Not $1 of your property tax goes to sewer and water if you are not a sewer and water customer.
Unless you're actually receiving the service, there's no contribution from non-consumers or customers to subsidize or bring in any revenue from the sewer and
So
water.
is it entirely up to them whether they want sewer and water?
No.
Well,
That's a bit of a different question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to.
Okay. So through the planning requirements, typically, if sewer and water is available, we do ask, or we do request, that certain properties be hooked up if it's available. So, an example is Airport Road. So when we brought out sewer and water out to Trust Joyce, at the time, or Weyerhaeuser now, the aspect was we're putting in 10 kilometers of sewer and water pipes. These people should be given the opportunity to connect to sewer and water. That was a bit of a beast beast because certain people said, well, I just put my septic field in, I just drilled a well. You know, maybe I want your sewer today because my field is failing, but my well is still fine. You know, is there arrangements we can work over in the short term, like in a 5 to 10 year term, to either connect, not connect, or even come up with a payment plan to connect? So that was probably our last biggest infrastructure project that we had to make some decisions on how and when are people going to connect. Through planning, I guess the planning department and their working with new developments and residential developments and whatnot, we really push the issue that you must connect to sewer and water. We don't want, you know, wells and septic fields at all possible within, you know, the service area that currently has sewer and water. Now, there are pockets of the town that have been, let's say, put on indefinite hold for sewer and water extensions just because of the number of homes and the amount of terrain and bedrock we'd have to go through. Like one that comes to mind right away is the top of Mascot, where there's 2 or 3 homes at the end, it's several hundred feet through bald rock, and the efficiencies and costing to extend those services is far beyond, you know, what the city and Edinburgh's residents are willing to pay. So it's really each individual circumstance is looked at and kind of a decision is made based on those circumstances. Does it make sense to force the issue and have people connect? Or does it make sense to stay with the status quo, whether they have water delivery, a well, a septic field, and so on? So
Okay.
I can't give you a direct answer. It would have to be on a case-by-case basis on what the circumstances are. So they, getting back to the sewer and water department here, they do flush and clean sewer mains. So we do have the equipment in terms of backhauls and flushing equipment to keep the lines free and clear of blockages and roots and whatnot. I think we've touched on the fee for service. Grinder pump maintenance, they do provide grinder pump maintenance to those that are lucky enough to have grinder pumps, I guess. I'm anticipating or guessing there's probably over 300 grinder pumps in our system currently, with the majority of them in the Jeffrey Malik area around Rapid Lake. And the The way that has shaken out over the years is there's been a lot of debate on whether the city should be looking after the grinder pumps or not. And I guess the decision was to continue on maintaining those grinder pumps. So just to give you an idea what a grinder pump is those are usually installed, when there's no opportunity to have gravity and slope on pipes to get out into a gravity sewer system out on the street. So that means either the houses are kind of low and they need to pump up to a sewer system, or a good example around Rabbit Lake is it's so flat around the lake, it's almost impossible to get sloping pipes to make it all the way around the lake and get into a gravity system and carry on to the sewage plant.
Councillor?
What does a grinder pump cost?
The actual units, they're usually a pump mechanism that's put into a canister that gets buried in the ground. And those grinder pumps can be anywhere from probably about $5,000 to $10,000 just for the supply and then the installation on top of that.
How many a year or get replaced?
Good question. It varies. I think as we get further along, year by year, we're getting more and more pumps retiring and failing at the same time because most of them went in at the same time. So in some years we could have half a dozen, some years we could have, be in the tens. So I guess in terms of the maintenance, sometimes it's just maintenance that's needed to them. If they're clogged up, they need to be cleaned and so on, and then they're back in service. So I'd have to look back and get some statistics on how many pumps on average we may replace versus what we maintain or just have to clean and keep in service. But we do keep a stock of pumps on hand. We keep about 5 to 10 pumps on the shelf just for those instances where, this is, the unit is done and it needs to be replaced.
In your opinion, does it consume a lot of time?
It does, yeah. So.
Yeah, Marco, can you just elaborate for everybody, like the grinder pump and then what the alternative could have been at the time, which would have been pumping station or stations?
Right, so anytime we're in a flat area or have to get sewage over a hill or up a valley or whatnot, you need some type of pumping mechanism. So Jeffrey Mellick back in the day, I think in the 80s or 90s is when most of those pumps went in and sewer, definitely the sewer, I'm not sure. I think the sewer and the water were both installed around Rabbit Lake at that time under the former town of Jeffrey Mellick. They had to make a decision on, I guess, what was the most cost-effective alternative, and they chose grinder pumps. So like Andrew said, there is the opportunity, like we see in my previous slides, where we have 64 pumping stations in town. So we could have gotten rid of 64 pumping stations and everybody pumps in town with a grinder pump. And, that's not an option we would consider, but that's kind of the far end of the spectrum. So looking at trying to move sewage, if we were looking at Rabbit Lake and the flat area right next to the lake, you'd likely need, I'm guessing, maybe 2 to 4 pumping stations to move that sewage over those flat areas to get up over the little hill and finally make it into the gravity sewer by the log cabin. I'm assuming at the time, the consultant and Jeffrey Mellick made a decision. It's probably easier and more economical for the capital install to go with grinder pumps instead of trying to get gravity sewer systems into pumping stations that the former town would look after. Obviously, that's a unique situation there because every time you dig a hole around the lake, it's going to fill with water. And that's probably one of the major decisions I would think was made in the past. These pumping stations that we're talking about, they're anywhere from 10 to 15 feet in the ground. And they need a sufficient volume of what we call a wet well to take the sewage, in which the pump would pump out and force the sewage down a force main. So I have to think if we're installing 2 to 4 pumping stations around Rabbit Lake, they would continuously be full of lake water, infiltration, a real pain to install during construction to deal with the water and dewatering. I don't even know if you could dewater Rabbit Lake Road out to get a dry hole to install anything 10 or 15 feet deep because you would be 5 or 10 feet deeper than the lake. So I have to think there were certain decisions made by the consultant in the former town of Jeffrey Mellick to go with a low pressure system that we see here today.
Thank you.
So the sewer and water department also approves and inspects any kind of new connections into the system, so they'll actually send out staff to ensure that any kind of connections to the city system are done in a proper manner and are approved. And they also look after summer water service. We have at least one in town that is in Kuwait that goes out the West Highway out from McMahon and Yates out towards the west boundary of the city. So they'll turn that water on in the spring and winterize it and blow it out and whatnot in the fall. So some items of interest within this department. I've kind of said this in many aspects, but a lot of the useful life is going to be reoccurring or coming to fruition here at a similar or same time. So a lot of these sewer and water projects in the past were major implementations of full neighborhoods or many sections of sewer and water installed at or around the same time. I have to think back from the 60s to the 80s, there was lots of, provincial money that came into play to say, here, here's a block of money, go get that neighborhood hooked up to sewer and water. So now, decades later, we're getting into a position where, a lot of this infrastructure is probably going to be coming to the end of its useful life at a similar time. As I mentioned, we have 64 pumping stations, which consumes a lot of time, a lot of cost and effort, even just to run these pumping stations with power. Having a pump changed out every 10 to 15 years after its useful life and so on. And just having a staff of 2 maintain 64 locations on an ongoing basis is quite a bit of a time-consuming effort and costly effort for the city to keep up on with these stations. The sewage plant was constructed in the 1960s, so we're probably getting to a stage maybe where its life is maybe halfway through or so now. And likewise, the water plant was constructed in the late 70s, so it's a little bit newer, maybe 10 to 15 years newer than the sewage plant. So if I remember correctly, there was a report commissioned through finance on the status of the sewer and water department, and their estimation, I think, was somewhere around 2050-ish is when these plants are going to need some major upgrades, improvements, and or replacements. So like we see with bridges, this is in the landfill, this is another big component that the city will need to be looking at in terms of long-range planning for those plants in some capacity. So again, they will be reaching their useful life sometime in the next few decades. So we'll definitely have to keep our eyes on that and how to kind of plan for those couple of plants, just like we would be looking at the landfill. The other hiccup, I guess, within the department is the marine crossings we have through various water bodies. They are a little bit of a different beast to work with, as we need to bring in certified divers to repair, to inspect, to do anything with these specific lines that are submerged in the water. So it's not quite as easy as calling the crew together, digging a hole and making a repair. We're actually having to sum divers from out of town to deal with these kinds of issues that we may encounter in marine crossings. And finally, as similar to solid waste, the only source of revenue is the user fees. So anybody who's hooked up to sewer and water and pays their monthly bills for sewer and water, that is the primary income and revenue for this specific utility. So getting to our final department or division under the group, we have engineering. So it's primarily looks after the linear asset projects, capital projects, related to road rehabilitation, sewer and water, and storm renewal projects. So typically, anytime you see a road closed for an extended period on a sewer and water project or a road paving project, that's probably under the auspice of the engineering department looking after that project with contracted services. So in addition to the tendering and design and whatnot, they're also responsible for the contract administration and inspection of those projects. and they also are involved with the bridges. So they will manage bridge projects, and seeing we don't have the expertise in-house on bridges and structures, typically any type of bridge work will be contracted out to a consulting firm, and the engineering department provides the project management as the owner for those projects. So kind of getting into that, large and complex projects are typically contracted out to consultants that are beyond capacity and of the department in regards to resources and time and whatnot. So those larger projects would still be project managed under the engineering department. So examples of larger and complex projects would be like a downtown revitalization, a major bridge project, and things of that kind of nature that are handed out to consultants to perform the tendering, the design, and the inspection during construction, with the engineering department overseeing those projects as the project manager in an owner capacity. They also provide technical review to the planning department for any kind of applications that come in. So in regards to commercial, industrial developments, large residential developments. So we will look at the technical aspects of those specific applications and assist in terms of any kind of site plan control, development agreements, and so on that the city may be interested in entering into. They provide review and approvals for third-party utilities, so we have quite a few requests that come in from, Enbridge Gas, Synergy North, communication companies and so on that want to either upgrade, extend their servicing and so on. That all goes through the engineering department for vetting, review, and final approval for that third-party utility to either repair, upgrade, or extend their plant and servicing. On an ongoing basis, the department also provides other support to other city divisions and departments. It could be anything from having to assist in hiring a consultant for a specialty thing, maybe for a facility, to how can we grade this parking lot to make it work, or assist in certain capital projects of paving or sewer and water and whatnot for other divisions beyond the main capital projects that they're assigned. They also look after asset condition of the linear assets and the bridges. So as mentioned before, they coordinate any kind of studies, like the Rural Roads Needs Study, for example, or coordinating the Street Logics people to come in on that 3-year basis for condition assessments of our paved roads. We arrange and look after contractors to come in and flush and videotape our storm sewers and sanitary sewers. So we have a visual and a condition rating for those types of assets. Yeah, I think that's primarily most of the asset management type of system work we get into in terms of conditions for those types of linear assets. And also as I mentioned before, the bridge inspections on a 2-year basis are also handled by the engineering department. So the GIS is the Geographical Information System. It's managed and maintained by the department. So what that is our digital mapping, which has several layers of our various assets, sewer, water, roads, and whatnot, in addition to aerial photography. And it also contains a majority of the data on those assets. So condition ratings, links, types of materials, and so on are contained within that data portion of that GIS system. And finally, the department handles anywhere from about $6 to $12 million of capital work a year. On the lower end, it would be those years where we have our typical projects of a few blocks of sewer and water, some road repavings and whatnot. In a higher year, in terms of the 12 million, it would be more of a downtown revitalization or a major bridge project that department's also handling. So we do have a range and fluctuation of how much dollar value of work that the department actually takes care of in any given year. So items of interest, one thing I guess we need to keep on the horizon or in our sights is there will become a time where the department won't be able to keep up and be overwhelmed with the amount of work it's assigned with the current resources we have. So, you know, if we're wanting to put dents and make some advancements in terms of infrastructure deficit, there will become a time where the engineering department may not be staffed enough. We may have to go to outside consultants, we may have to look at other alternatives to get, you know, a certain amount of projects that council may want to take on to put a bite into that infrastructure deficit. Just as some information here, typically what I've seen, I would expect hiring an outside consultant is anywhere from 5 to 10 times higher in cost than having internal resources, you know, work on those projects. So that is something to consider when we're looking at divvying out work on what makes sense to keep internal versus what projects should go to consultants and how much work we might want to add on that might have to go to consultants or come up with some other alternatives to deal with that amount of work.
Councillor Koch had a question.
What are the, I would guess you probably have a perception of what some barriers might be to increasing the capacity of the department. Can you identify what those might be?
Well, typically engineering is a staff-based resource, so it's people. Primarily, you know, our budgets and whatnot are really service-related. So more people means more things we can get done, less people means less tasks and projects we can take on. So, you know, what I see the engineering department being is really a service for the city as a whole, but also for other departments and whatnot. Like I said, it's not just the projects that have been assigned to the engineering department and engineering and infrastructure. There are other assistance that is provided to other departments on a regular basis. So that kind of segues into this last bullet here is some of the hindrances or hiccups within the department are getting those unplanned or unexpected projects pop up. So, you know, we have our normal year-to-year annual rotation of work. You know, we do our tendering and design and whatnot in the winter, and we do our construction inspection and contract administration in the summer as a cyclical and seasonal type of activity for the department. So when we get a flood that lasts most of the summer, well, that's a major hiccup in trying to, you know, assist and address those concerns, but still keep the daily stuff we've already planned for in terms of paving projects, sewer water projects, and so on. So it's a fine balance on any given year. Some years it's a minor hiccup for a week or two because it was a minor problem, and as we saw this year, it was a problem all summer for most of engineering and infrastructure to deal with unforeseen circumstances that crop up on us. So.
Right. So I guess what I was asking, if I may, just follow up, is are there barriers to actually increasing the number of people in the department? So is it office space or just budget or kind of things like that if we're thinking about balancing external versus internal resources?
So I think Marco's captured the boots on the ground. I'm just going to let Roberta speak.
Sure, you know, that again is a question for this council in terms of investment. And, you know, I think when you take a look at the department and the different projects that we staff, we have a municipal engineer, which will be the general manager of engineer, which you'll see is going for recruitment right away. One project engineer that, in fact, the last council invested in, so now we have 2 project engineers, and then our CET group. So those technical resources take investment. There's no problem, it takes us a little longer, but we do have attraction rates in terms of being able to fill. Those positions are getting filled when we recruit. But it does mean that we are actually saying, yes, we will increase that complement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Moncrief and
What is your FTEs?
Well,
How many of them are professional? You're saying 3?
Well, right. Do you have the count?
Yeah, so in terms of professionally designated, so we have, there would be the GM of engineering and 2 project engineers, so 3 engineers. And then we do have 2 at the civil engineering technologist level.
And how much is the total complement? I think that's it.
So the total right now, as of today, we have a municipal engineer, project engineer, a civil tech, special projects position, and a GIS technician. So as of Monday, we'll be adding the one more project engineer that Roberta's alluded
I
to.
guess I'm asking total in engineering and infrastructure.
The whole department.
We can get that to you, we have it, we'll get that to you.
Sure.
Okay, I thought you were just talking
No, I
about
want to know
engineering.
everybody, and then I wanted to know, so that answer as well.
Okay. Yeah, we can,
Counselor Manson.
we can scratch that for sure.
Michael, I just want to tell you, we really appreciate your expertise and knowledge in this department and your calm, cool collectedness.
Okay, well, that's much appreciated. Thank you.
You know, I'd share, I'd share, so I've had I don't know if it's good fortune, I've worked in an environment without in-house engineering, and seeing what we have here, I mean, the value add, it's a real game changer relative to coming from a community without in-house engineering, let me tell you, we get a lot of value out of that group. Mr. Chair.
Yeah, so just one point, because I remember back in 2004, I used to bring this up, and for whatever reason, but you talk about adding, the opportunity cost to have people on staff versus just contracting out for this project. Has there ever been any thought to, why not just add that additional cost to have the additional staff to projects and then allocate it out based on a percent? Like, I mean, it's a cost anyways. Like, I don't understand. There was always a reluctance to do that because, we don't need to hire consultants. Well, yes, you do, because you forewent this project this year. I mean, I saw it for a lot of years when I was around on the first go-through, where things were just delayed because we didn't have enough staff internally, but they wouldn't spend the extra money to bring someone on staff and then use them for other things throughout the rest of the year. I mean, there's a huge savings to be gained right across the board doing it that way, but they just would not add the cost into the project for whatever reason.
Roberta, can you speak to the switch in strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to take a look at the nature of the project. So sometimes it is appropriate to have an external consultant or an external staff brought in temporarily. We are not finding success in temporary types of appointments. When people are coming here, we're not, we're 2 hours from a major center, you're not able to drive, so you don't get people who are in the consulting pickup business where they pick up, 2 or 3 year stints. You're finding people who would be looking for more permanent work. In terms of the consultation, we have, a municipality is not just one and done, right? There's a continuous, interest and investment in the infrastructure. It's integrated. That knowledge and that comfort with our infrastructure is really critical. And if you take a look at, the expertise and the knowledge that Marco has today and all the work he's done to try to impart that knowledge and that history down the line to the team, it's not something that you could just draw on a paper and be like, yeah, everything looks like this. Right? He repeatedly reminds me too about, hey, we're drilling through rock, this one looks this way, this is this, it's very, very unique and complex. So that knowledge is not readily available in off the shelf like it is in some other centers. So those are just some considerations. Where we do have that opportunity, the team has successfully put those dollars in and has used project management or consulting services. That is their common practice. What we're saying is this is over and above really that part.
And we did include project management on the
Yeah.
Railway Street project this year as well. Marco, did we do it on 17 East or just Railway?
No, that was all in-house. Those are projects that were capable of in-house. So I guess there's two prongs of the fork here, I guess we look at. One is, we need external consultants for those specialty projects. We just don't have the resources inside. In terms of mechanical systems, electrical systems, structural, integrity for buildings and inspections and looking at structures and stuff. So
Geotechnical is another example.
geotechnical is another example where I think it would be foolish to bring on staff for those very specific things. We could contract out that are needed on an as-needed basis. as opposed to our core infrastructure stuff, dealing with sewer, water, and roads is our kind of our core business, I guess we'll say, at the engineering department. And I guess being a professional engineer, you have to be very careful on what you work on what you've been taught, what your stamp says, and what your knowledge is. So just because I'm a civil engineer, there's vast arrays of different types of civil engineers, just like there are doctors. I always use the doctor analogy. Well, I'm a doctor. Well, what kind of doctor are you? Are you a general practitioner who will give you a pill if you have a headache? Or are you a brain surgeon that's going to work on my cranium and do something with my brain? Two totally different things, but they're doctors. And I think a lot of misconception that people have is, well, you're an engineer, you should be able to do that. Well, no, there's certain ethics, I guess, that we all adhere to as professional engineers to say, no, I'm a civil engineer, but I was not, I don't have the knowledge and structures, even though structural engineers are civil engineers. You have civil engineers that are highway engineers. You have civil engineers that are, in various multitudes, just like doctors are. So we have to be very careful on what staffing components do we need versus what can we actually get away with in terms of consultants. Now, that's kind of one area of work and specialization. The other one that we kind of talked about here is just workload, right? So we want to double our roads program. We want to get 8 blocks of sewer water done, instead of 4. That's a typical year. Well, that means we need more staff to deal with those typical things that the department deals with. So that's a bit of a different beast again in terms of staffing for more work versus bringing in consultants for specialty types of work for mechanical, electrical, structural, bridge type things. So I don't know if that provides any insight into it, but.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, one more. Got one last slide here. So I was asked to kind of give a brief overview on city staff versus contracted services, just to kind of give you an idea on how that kind of works and rolls out. So as a rule of thumb, maintenance is generally provided by city staff, whereas major capital projects are typically contracted out. So that's a rule of thumb and distinction that we should be aware of. However, there are certain circumstances where contractors do supplement the daily maintenance type of stuff. So in my second bullet there, we will hire extra snow plowing equipment to assist city crews. We'll hire extra snow haul trucks to make sure that we have enough, fleet of trucks to move the snow when the snow banks are being removed. Street light maintenance is another one where we don't have the internal staff and linemen to work up on poles and bucket trucks and whatnot, so that'll be contracted out. The yearly line painting, which only takes a couple of weeks, is typically contracted out. And, in summing that up, larger sewer, water, and road projects, bridge projects are definitely contracted out. So in the consulting aspect of things that we just discussed, so large complicated projects, again, we will contract out. An example is a downtown revitalization. If we were to take that on internally, that means nothing else gets done in the city. There's no municipal paving, there's no extra sewer water, being done, or our normal allotment of work and planned work would be occurring. So that's where we make those decisions in terms of where we contract out and where we're capable of keeping, some of that workload internally. We always want to keep a buffer or some capacity within the engineering department to deal with these unforeseens and unexpecteds. So, it doesn't make sense in certain circumstances to call a consultant, that it's going to take us more time to explain the situation, for them to review it and come up with a solution or address the problem, as opposed to internally, we know our systems, we know, resources we have available and so on. So it's, like Kyle said, it's kind of nice to have that internal resource to turn to rather than, Mr. Consultant, can you come help us? Well, yeah, I'll be there in a week or two, and until we sign the purchase order contract, we're not doing anything for you. So I think Kyle hit the nail on the head. Having that capability of an internal engineering department really gives the city a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunities to deal with small little one-offs that kind of are ankle biters that you know, you'd pay tens of thousands of dollars for a consultant to look at, you know, like in terms of an outside source, so.
Councilor
Are you retiring, Marco?
Never.
Secret.
Are you a valuable resource?
We don't bring that word up.
Yeah.
So that's the end of my presentation. I think we had some good dialogue and conversations throughout it. I don't know if there's any other questions or concerns or anything over there at this point. Oh, one thing before, I just want to mention, in addition to the minimum maintenance standards that will be posted on the SharePoint, I'm going to end up posting probably 3 or 4 bridge documents, just so you can get an idea of the extent of the bridges we have and the amount of effort that goes into those inspections. It'll give you a little bit of brief. There's one document called the BCI, which is the Bridge Condition Index. That is probably the easiest to flip through. It'll have kind of 1 page per bridge, and it'll rate that bridge out of a rating system of 100 to 0 to kind of give you an idea of what's good, what's fair, what's poor, what's in good shape, and so on. So that's probably the best document just to kind of get a flavor on where we're at with bridges. So I will post those either later today or sometime this week. I'm not sure.
Councilor?
That covered my question because there's some urgency around 1 or 2 of the bridges, right?
Actually, we're not in that bad a shape. Over the last few years, we've been lucky. We replaced the First Avenue Bridge across the creek in Lakeside. We replaced the Coker Bridge a few years back up in JM.
7th, or not 7th, but or 7th?
Yeah, 7th. Sorry, not First. Did I say First Avenue?
Yeah.
I meant 7th Avenue Bridge. Now, the condition of the bridges is in okay shape from an overall standpoint, and I think you'll see when you flip through that DCI rating document, we're not in that bad a shape because we've actually taken the steps over the last 5 to 10 years in putting money into those bridges and rehabilitating, trying to get on those things and not wait. Something that would be a $1 million fix today might be a $2 million fix in 5 years. So we have been pretty proactive in trying to get bridge projects up to the forefront, because spend a dime today is going to save you $1 a few years type thing. Looking at the complexity and size of some of these bridges, it takes some major money coming forward, and you'll see in the capital budget there's a couple of major bridge projects we have in the 5-year forecast that we're going to allow.
Yeah.
So we haven't lost sight of it. There was a period of time in the early 2000s which we kind of took a break from bridges because we were really hoping that the provincial government would come to the table with funding and assistance for them. So we lost a little bit of time, a decade or 2 ago, sitting on these bridges, kind of waiting while we're not doing anything until we know what's going on with funding and so on. So at some point, we had to make a decision to say, hey, we can't wait any longer. We're going to have to come up with creative funding solutions. Luckily enough, in the last few years, they've come up with the gas tax, which we use quite a bit on roads and bridges, OSIP funding, and so on. So we are trying to be creative in getting those bridge projects, lined up and secured, because when we look at the Q8 Channel Bridge or some of these larger ones, there's a lot of money sitting in that asset that, like I said, they're not getting any younger and they're not getting any newer. So definitely some difficult decisions to make going forward on those bridges.
Will I be hearing back from about the staffing complement?
So we actually have that for you, Councilor.
Yeah. So in terms of engineering, the operations, it's about 42 FTE. Utilities, which is our engineering, water and waste, solid waste, is 49 FTE. We're just under 90 on total.
Thanks.
Any other questions of Marco? Thanks, Marco. Lots of good information there, and prepping us up for the budget deliberations. So thank you very much.
That's a big task, budget.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna take a little break here, okay? People need to get up and stretch and get a coffee or whatever, get a snack, and then we'll, if you give us a few minutes, then we'll.
That's your pleasure, sir.
Go right into the next presentation. Okay, thank you.